A soaked mechanic stops to change a tire in the pouring rain only to discover the woman he's helping is no ordinary traveler, but a runaway princess hiding from a life she never chose. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment. Where in the world are you watching from? The clouds rolled in thick and fast, swallowing the late afternoon sky like smoke curling through a chimney. The scent of rain clung to the air, heavy and electric, and by the time Jesse Carter locked up the last bay door of Carter's auto, the first drops were already splattering on the pavement. He tugged his hood over his head and made for his old F-150, its faded blue paint now speckled with cold rain. Cedar Creek didn't get many storms like this in early spring. Usually, the sky just brooded for a while, rumbled once or twice, then moved on. But not today. Today, the thunder cracked like it meant something, echoing off the surrounding hills and shaking the windows in their frames. Jesse muttered a low curse as he slid into the driver's seat and turned the key. The engine coughed to life with a familiar sputter before settling into its usual growl. The streets were nearly empty, most folks already tucked in at home. Jesse drove slow, windshield wipers beating a frantic rhythm against the downpour. He was tired, hungry, and still smelled faintly of motor oil, but it was a good kind of tired, the kind that came from doing honest work with your hands. His day had started before sunrise, fixing Mrs. Danvers' old Buick and rotating the tires on that busted mail truck the town insisted on keeping alive. Small victories. They added up. As he turned onto County Road 9, lightning flashed across the sky, illuminating the wet world in stark white. That's when he saw Ida White car pulled halfway onto the shoulder, hazard lights blinking weakly through the sheets of rain. Jesse frowned. The vehicle looked out of place, all sleek lines and luxury curves. Not the kind of thing you usually saw limping along in a town like Cedar Creek. He slowed instinctively. There was someone outside the car, standing by the rear tire, head bowed against the wind. Just a silhouette through the rain, but Jesse could see her arms hugging her sides, coat clinging to her like wet paper. She didn't look up. Most people would have kept driving. Not Jesse. He pulled over. Shifted into park. Grabbed the umbrella from behind the seat. Somewhere deep down, he knew this wasn't going to be just another roadside repair. The rain came down harder now, thick sheets slamming against the windshield, blurring the world into smeared streaks of gray and silver. Jesse eased his truck to the shoulder, his tires crunching over the gravel with a slow, deliberate roll. He flipped on his hazards and cut the engine. The rain drummed like fingertips on the roof above him as he stared through the downpour at the stranded car ahead. It was definitely high-end. Sleek and low to the ground, the kind of car that looked like it belonged in a showroom or on a coastal highway, not on the back roads of Cedar Creek. The rear tire sagged, flat and useless, the rim almost kissing the asphalt. Water pooled around it, threatening to swallow the tire whole. Jesse grabbed his old jacket from the passenger seat and shrugged it on. It was already half soaked from earlier, and the zipper caught halfway up like it always did. He didn't bother with the umbrella this time. What was the point? He'd be drenched in seconds anyway. The cold rain hit him like a slap the moment he stepped out, cutting through denim and cotton, creeping past his collar. He squinted against it and walked toward the car. She hadn't heard him yet. The woman stood with her back to him, hood pulled up, arms still folded tight across her chest. Her posture was tense, more frustration than fear, but Jesse approached slowly all the same. "Hey!" he called out, raising his voice over the storm. "Flat tire?" She turned quickly. For a second, their eyes met through the rain. Even under the hood, her face struck him sharp cheekbones, eyes too alert to be careless. She blinked once, caught off guard. Then nodded. "Yeah," she said. Her voice was low, smooth, and clipped with an accent he couldn't quite place. "I hit something. I didn't see it until it was too late." "Mind if I take a look?" Jesse asked, already stepping closer. She hesitated, then nodded again. He crouched by the wheel, rain soaking through his jeans as he examined the tire. Definitely shredded. No patch job was going to save it. "I can put your spare on," he said, standing. "You got one in the trunk?" "I think so," she said, brushing wet strands of hair from her face. "But I've never used it." Jesse offered a faint smile. "That's what I'm here for." And without another word, he headed for the trunk, wondering just who exactly this woman was, why someone like her was driving alone through his nowhere town in the middle of a storm. She stood like a painting still, striking, and just a little out of place. The rain poured around her, soaking her long trench coat until it clung to her frame like it had been painted on. Dark hair, plastered to her cheeks and neck, slipped from beneath her hood, and her boot Cheyenne leather, not built for gravel, were already caked in mud. But despite the misery of it all, there was a certain grace to her, the kind that didn't come from effort but from something deeper. Something bred, not taught. Jesse hoisted the spare from the trunk and glanced at her as she stood off to the side, arms crossed tightly, trying to stay warm. Most people looked small in the rain, shivering and miserable. But not her. Even dripping wet, she held herself with a kind of quiet composure that didn't match the situation. "You okay?" he asked, setting the tire down beside the flat. She nodded, though her expression was unreadable. "Just wet," she said, voice calm but clipped. He chuckled under his breath, crouching again to get started. "Yeah, we're both that now." As he worked, he kept half an eye on her. Something didn't add up. She didn't flinch when the wind whipped her coat open, didn't complain about the cold, didn't fumble for her phone or pace nervously like most stranded drivers would. She just watched. Quiet. Measured. "What brings you through Cedar Creek?" Jesse asked casually, wrenching the lug nuts loose one by one. "Just passing through," she replied. Her tone made it clear she didn't want to say more, and Jesse didn't push. Still, that answer felt like a lie. People didn't just pass through Cedar Creek. There wasn't much to see unless you were lost or running from something. He swapped the tire and practiced motions, water dripping from his sleeves, the metal cold and slick under his fingers. The whole job took maybe 10 minutes, but it felt longer with her standing there, silent and still, like a question he couldn't quite figure out. When he finished, he stood and wiped his hands on a rag from his jacket pocket. "You're good to go." She looked at him, then really looked. And for just a second something flickered in her eyes. Gratitude, maybe? Or regret. "Thank you," she said softly. Jesse nodded. "Drive safe." She hesitated, then gave a small nod and walked back toward the driver's side, water splashing under her boots. Jesse watched her go, the rain falling harder now, his breath rising in the cold air. Something about her didn't sit right. And he had the strangest feeling this wasn't the last he'd see of her. Jesse tightened the last lug nut and gave the spare tire a firm tug to make sure it was secure. The job was done, easy as they came, but the storm hadn't let up a bit. Rain was still coming down in sheets, soaking his jacket through to the lining. He straightened slowly, his knees stiff from kneeling in the wet gravel, and met her eyes again. She was standing just where he'd left her, barely moved. The hood of her coat had slipped off her head now, and her dark hair clung to her cheeks and neck. Despite the weather and the mud creeping up her designer boots, she held herself with the kind of composure you didn't often see in small-town shoulders back, chin up, as if nothing could touch her. "Should be good to go," Jesse said, stepping back from the car. She nodded, then reached inside her coat and pulled out a sleek black wallet. "Let me pay you for your time." Jesse shook his head before she could even open it. "Don't worry about it." She blinked, surprised. "But you're soaked. I should at least—" He cut her off with a shrug. "It's just a tire. No big deal." She studied him, then not just looked at him, but really studied him, as if she couldn't quite place where someone like him came from. Like she'd just stumbled onto another species. "I insist," she said quietly. Jesse met her gaze, calm and steady. "Then pay it forward." The rain fell between them, filling the silence. Finally, she let out a soft breath and tucked the wallet away. "Thank you," she said again, but this time there was a little weight behind it, less polite, more real. Jesse nodded. "Anytime." She opened the car door, hesitated, and then looked back at him. "Do you own the garage in town? Carter's?" "Yeah," he said, lifting an eyebrow. I thought so. A small smile tugged at her lips, almost like she'd figured something out. Then she climbed in and started the engine. The quiet purr of money well spent. The headlights cut through the storm, and just like that, she was gone, a taillight swallowed by rain. Jesse stood there for a moment longer, water trickling down the back of his neck, watching the empty road. He wasn't sure what it was, her voice, her eyes, the way she never flinched, but something about her stayed with him. She said she was just passing through, but Jesse wasn't so sure. Jesse stood beneath the awning of the garage the next afternoon, arms crossed, as he watched the clouds stubbornly refuse to clear. The rain had eased into a mist, but the sky still hung low and gray, casting everything in dull tones. It had been a slow day, just an oil change and a battery swap it. Jesse didn't mind the quiet, gave him time to think. Time to think about her. He wasn't usually the type to dwell. He fixed things, kept his head down, went home to his dog and his half-finished dinner most nights. But there was something about the woman from the storm, something that had settled under his skin and refused to leave, the way she'd watched him like she wasn't used to kindness. Like she wasn't sure if she should trust it. He hadn't expected to see her again. So, when the same sleek white car pulled into the lot just after 2, tires crunching over gravel, he didn't even try to hide his surprise. He stepped forward slowly, as the engine cut off and the door opened. She was out before he could say a word, coat dry now, hair pulled back, but still, just as composed. Maybe even more so, without the storm lashing around them. Didn't expect to see you again, Jesse said. She smiled faintly. I figured you might say that. Car giving you trouble? No, she said, tucking her hands into her coat pockets. I just wanted to say thank you, properly. Jesse tilted his head. I thought we settled that. I know, she said, eyes meeting his, but I didn't introduce myself yesterday. That was rude of me. He raised an eyebrow. Not really. She hesitated, then extended a hand. Elle. He shook it. Her fingers were warm, firm. Jesse. I remember, she said, with a soft smile. Carter's auto. They stood there a moment longer, an easy quiet stretching between them. Then she glanced at her watch, something flickering in her expression, urgency maybe, or hesitation. Well, she said, stepping back toward her car, I should go. Just wanted to say, thank you. Any time, Jesse replied, the word already familiar. Elle slid into the driver's seat, gave him one last look, and drove off, leaving behind nothing but the scent of something expensive in the air and the strange pull of a name that suddenly felt heavier than it should have. Elle, short, simple, but somehow it didn't feel like the whole truth. The next few days passed in that slow, familiar rhythm. Cedar Creek always seemed to keep early mornings, steady work, and evenings where the quiet stretched long. Jesse kept busy under hoods and between oil pans, but his thoughts drifted more often than he'd admit, especially when the rain let up and the sky finally cleared, leaving the roads dry, but his mind clouded with one name. Elle. He didn't know why she stuck with him. Maybe it was the way she spoke, like each word was carefully chosen. Or the way she'd looked at him, not with pity or flirtation, but like she was trying to understand something about him. Or maybe it was the sense that she wasn't really passing through at all. Late Wednesday morning, while Jesse was bent under the hood of a rusted-out Ford, his buddy Rick sauntered into the garage, a half-eaten cinnamon roll in one hand and town gossip practically spilling from his mouth. "You hear about the woman at the inn?" Rick asked, brushing crumbs off his shirt as he leaned against the workbench. Jesse didn't look up. "What woman?" "Tall, dark hair, real proper," Rick said, grinning like he'd stumbled into a good story. "Checked into Daisy's place Sunday night, hasn't said much since. Been asking around, though. About the town, the people, like she's doing research or something." Jesse's hands paused for half a second before moving again. "She paying with cash?" he asked casually. "Yeah, crisp bills too. Like right out of the mint. Foreign, I think. Daisy said it felt like something out of a movie." Jesse finally looked up. "What's she asking about?" Rick shrugged. Just questions. Who owns what? How the town works? Where people go? Said she's a writer or a travel blogger or something. But Daisy says she doesn't carry a laptop, just a little notebook she never lets out of her sight. Jesse wiped his hands on a rag and leaned back against the car, pretending to mull it over. She got a name? Rick grinned. L. Just L. No last name. Fancy, right? Jesse didn't smile. He stared out at the road, heart ticking just a little faster. She hadn't just disappeared. She was still here, watching, asking questions. And suddenly, he wasn't sure if that should comfort him or worry him. The bell above the library door gave its usual soft jingle as Jesse stepped inside, brushing a few stubborn raindrops from his jacket. He hadn't planned to stop by. It was supposed to be a quick detour to drop off the car manual he'd borrowed for an old Dodge he was patching together. But something about the quiet always pulled him in. The smell of paper and dust, the hushed whispers of pages turning it, was one of the few places in Cedar Creek where time seemed to slow even more than usual. He handed the manual to Mrs. Abernathy at the front desk with a polite nod, then wandered toward the back shelves, more out of habit than intent. That's when he saw her. L. She stood by the large window near the nonfiction section, bathed in late morning light that filtered through streaked glass. She wasn't wearing the sleek coat or those expensive boots this time. Today, she looked like any other town local fitted jeans, worn sneakers, and a gray sweater with the sleeves pushed to her elbows. Her hair was tied up, messy in a way that looked unintentional but somehow perfect, and she was reading. Not skimming or pretending, but genuinely absorbed eyes tracing each line, one hand lightly gripping the edge of the page, as if the book might float away. Jesse stayed back, half hidden between shelves, telling himself he was just observing, that he'd only pause a second, then move on. But he didn't. There was something in the way she furrowed her brow at whatever she was reading, then scribbled a note in a small leather notebook tucked under her arm. A flicker of intensity. Focus. Like she wasn't just passing time, she was searching for something. After a moment, Elle closed the book, placed it back neatly, and turned. Her eyes swept the room casual until they landed on him. For a second, neither of them moved. Then, she smiled. Not a surprised smile, not the polite kind reserved for strangers, but something softer, like she'd expected to see him eventually. "Jesse," she said as she walked over, tucking the notebook under her arm. "I thought that was you." He raised an eyebrow. "Didn't figure you for the library type." "Didn't figure you for the spying type," she said lightly. He almost smiled. "Touché." Elle tilted her head. "You always this quiet, or is it just around me?" "Just trying to figure you out," he said plainly. Her smile faltered, just slightly. "Let me know if you do." And then she stepped past him, heels tapping softly on the wooden floor, and disappeared down the next aisle, leaving Jesse standing there. Heart steady, but his thoughts tangled like a reel of wire he couldn't unwind. The coffee shop on Main was a converted old post office mall, drafty and held together by charm and mismatched furniture. It wasn't much, but the coffee was strong and the cinnamon scones sold out before noon most days. Jesse didn't usually linger there, not when there was work to be done, but when Elle asked half-smile, head tilted, eyes curious, couldn't come up with a reason to say no. They sat by the window, two mugs steaming between them, the soft hum of conversation and clinking cups filling the space around their silence. Outside, Cedar Creek drifted along in its usual slow rhythm pickups, parked crooked along the curb, teenagers loitering near the general store, and the faint sound of someone tuning a guitar down the block. Elle took a sip, then set her cup down, fingers tracing the rim absently. "You've lived here all your life?" she asked. Jesse nodded. "Born a few blocks that way. My dad opened the garage before I could walk. I just stuck around." "Never wanted to leave?" she asked, voice light but probing. He leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing slightly. "I used to. Thought I'd head west, maybe open a shop somewhere near the mountains. But life happens. Things shift." Elle nodded, like she understood. though he couldn't imagine she'd ever been trapped by money or responsibility the way he had. Still, she didn't push. Not yet. You seem... She paused, searching for the word. Free. He let out a quiet laugh. Free? That's a new one. You own your time, she said. You fix things with your hands. You don't answer to anyone. Jessie raised an eyebrow. I answer to busted engines and brake lines. And half the town owes me tabbed work I'll never see a dime for. But you choose to stay, she countered. That's freedom, isn't it? He studied her for a moment. You asking me these questions for you, or for a story you're writing? Elle's gaze met his, unwavering. Does it matter? Maybe it did. Maybe it didn't. But as their fingers brushed when reaching for their mugs, something passed between them, quick, unspoken, but impossible to ignore. Freedom. Jessie wasn't sure he had it. But she? She looked like she'd never known what it felt like. The Saturday farmers market was in full swing by mid-morning, with rows of pop-up tents lining Main Street and the warm scent of kettle corn drifting on the breeze. It was one of Cedar Creek's better days, sunny, with just enough chill in the air to remind everyone fall was coming. Jessie wandered between booths with a cup of black coffee in hand, keeping an eye out for brake pads on sale and grabbing the occasional apple fritter. He wasn't expecting to see Elle, but there she was, standing by a stall selling honey and homemade soaps, dressed in faded jeans and a flannel shirt that didn't look like it had ever seen a royal closet. She was holding a jar of lavender scrub in one hand, turning it slowly under the light, her brow furrowed in that same thoughtful way he'd seen back in the library. He hesitated a moment, then walked over. Didn't think you were the farmer's market type, Jessie said. She looked up and smiled, that same soft curve of her lips that always seemed just a little guarded. I'm full of surprises. Clearly, he said. Didn't peg you for the lavender, sugar, scrub kind either. It's for a gift, she said smoothly. Then, with a small laugh, she added, though I've never seen such charming, provincial offerings. The words hung in the air a beat too long. Provincial. It was just one word. But it carried weight, polished, precise, not something locals used in casual talk. And the way she said it, just a bit too clipped, a little too elegant, didn't quite fit the version of herself she'd been wearing like borrowed clothes. Jessie caught it. So did someone else. Oh, you're not from around here, are you? Came a voice from behind the stall. Mrs. Keller, the vendor, leaned forward slightly, squinting at Elle like she'd just remembered seeing her on a magazine cover. Where's that accent from, honey? Europe somewhere? Elle froze for the briefest second. Then she smiled, effortless and smooth. I moved around a lot growing up. My parents were diplomatic types. Is that so? Mrs. Keller said, not quite convinced, but too polite to push. Jessie didn't say anything, but he didn't need to. Elle glanced at him sideways, just long enough to register that he'd heard it too. As they stepped away from the booth, she spoke low. I slipped. Little bit, Jessie replied. She looked up at him, eyes unreadable. You going to ask questions? Not yet, he said. But I'm guessing there's a lot you're not saying. She didn't deny it. She just walked beside him, quiet and careful, like someone waiting for the next wrong step. It started as a whisper, the kind that breezes through a small town like wind, through cornfields, subtle, quiet, and impossible to ignore once you know it's there. Jessie first heard it from Rick, again, this time leaning against the hood of a rust-colored Chevy with his usual smirk replaced by something more cautious. You see that guy in the gray suit walking around town this morning? Rick asked, flicking his thumb toward the diner across the street. Looked like he just stepped off Wall Street, black car, slick shoes, asking questions. Jessie straightened up from under the hood, wiping his hands on a rag. What kind of questions? About a woman, Rick said. Traveling alone, mid to late 20s, dark hair, real specific like. Said she might be new to town. Quiet, private. Jessie's jaw clenched almost imperceptibly. Did he say who he was? Nope, Rick said. Didn't give a name. Just flashed some ID real quick. Could have been government, could have been fake, who knows. But he gave Marla at the diner the creeps, I'll tell you that much. Jesse said nothing, but his mind was already racing. He hadn't seen Elle since the market. She'd gone quiet again. No calls, no messages, no random pop-ups at the garage or library. And now this. He finished up the Chevy, but he wasn't focused. His hands moved automatically, tightening bolts and checking levels, but his head was miles away. Later that afternoon, he swung by the diner for a late coffee. Marla met him at the counter, lowering her voice as she poured him a fresh cup. He was polite, she said, answering the question before Jesse even asked it. But not friendly. The kind of man who watches everything but smiles at nothing. Jesse nodded slowly. Marla leaned closer. You don't think he's looking for that girl, do you? The pretty one who came through during the storm? Jesse didn't answer. Just stared down at the dark swirl of coffee in his cup. He had a feeling the quiet spell in Cedar Creek was ending. And somewhere out there, Elle was being hunted whether she knew it yet or not. It happened by accident. Jesse wasn't the snooping type. He'd been raised better than that small-town manners, and all but when Elle rushed out of the garage that afternoon, purse slipping off her shoulder, scattering its contents across the concrete floor like spilled secrets. He didn't think. He just moved to help. "Wait!" she said sharply, already crouching, hands fumbling for the scattered items. A compact mirror, a silver pen, a worn leather notebook with a ribbon tied tightly around it, a few loose bills, and a slim navy blue booklet that slid just under his boot before he noticed. Jesse bent and picked it up before she could. The weight of it was nothing. The meaning, thou everything. A gold crest embossed across the front shimmered in the light. Not American, not familiar. He turned it slightly and saw the lettering. Kingdom of Morania. Diplomatic passport. Then the name below the emblem caught his eye. Eleonore Isabella Celeste du Marais. His chest tightened. Elle, not just Elle. Princess Eleonore. Elle snatched the passport from his hand. Faster than he'd seen her move before. That's private. He didn't say anything at first. Just stared at her, the pieces clicking together in rapid succession, the voice, the elegance, the way she never quite flinched even when the world spun sideways. He knew now why her words were so careful, why her eyes always seemed to scan the edges of every room. "Morania?" he finally said, his voice low. "That's real, right? A country?" She closed her eyes for half a second. "Yes, it's small, coastal, south of France. And you're not just visiting." "No," she admitted, her voice just a whisper now. Jesse leaned against the workbench, rubbing the back of his neck. "So, what are you doing here, in Cedar Creek, changing tires in a thunderstorm and hiding in bookstores?" She looked up at him. There was no point pretending anymore. "I left," she said. "I left my life, the crown, everything." He didn't respond, couldn't just yet. The garage buzzed quietly with the hum of fluorescent lights overhead, and somewhere outside, the wind stirred dust across the gravel. "I didn't want to be found," she said softly. "And I didn't want you to find out like that." Jesse met her gaze. Too late. Jesse closed the garage door behind them, the metal slamming shut with a finality that echoed louder than either of them expected. The rain had returned, tapping against the high windows like impatient fingers. Elle stood in the center of the room, her back straight, hands clasped in front of her like she was waiting for a verdict. "You're a princess," Jesse said, the words foreign in his mouth, like trying to speak a language he didn't know he knew. Elle didn't flinch, but her eyes darkened. "I was." He paced, slow and measured, trying to keep the rising storm in his chest from showing. "You told me you were just passing through. No last name, no story. Just Elle." "I didn't lie about everything," she said quietly. Jesse turned toward her. "You lied about who you are." "I hid who I was," she corrected. "That's not the same." "It is when people are looking for you," he shot back. "There's a man in a suit walking around town, asking questions, flashing badges. You think that doesn't put people at risk? I didn't ask for help, she said, lifting her chin. No, you just stood in the rain looking lost and let someone else do the saving, Jesse said. His tone wasn't cruel, but it was firm. He'd had enough of guessing at half-truths. Elle's shoulders sank, the fight draining from her. She moved to sit on the worn stool near the workbench, folding her hands in her lap. When she spoke again, her voice had softened. I was supposed to marry a man I barely knew. A political alliance good for the country, good for the crown, but not for me. Jesse didn't speak. He leaned against the tool chest, arms crossed. I tried to negotiate, to push back. I was told it wasn't my role to have opinions, she said. So I left. I booked a flight, picked a place on the map that didn't look like a headline, and I ran. Her voice cracked, just slightly. I didn't mean to drag anyone into it, she added, meeting his eyes. I just wanted space. Quiet. A place where I wasn't Her Royal Highness. Just someone who could breathe. Jesse studied her, the weight of her words sinking in. You should have told me. I was afraid you'd treat me different, he exhaled. Too late for that, too. But even as he said it, some small part of him didn't want to walk away. Not yet. The rain had softened into a mist by the time Jesse poured 2 mugs of coffee from the garage's old drip machine. The taste was a little burnt, like always, but it gave his hands something to do, something steady. He handed a cup to Elle, who took it with a quiet, "Thank you," and wrapped both hands around it like she needed the warmth more than the caffeine. They sat in the back office, a cluttered space full of faded calendars, oil-stained receipts, and the smell of rubber and rust. Outside, the world was gray and wet, but inside, something fragile had settled between them, truth, finally bare. So, Jesse said, voice low but level. Why Cedar Creek? Elle glanced up, her eyes tired but clear. Because I didn't know where else to go. He raised a brow, waiting. I closed my eyes and pointed, she said, with a faint, almost embarrassed smile. On a map. It could have been any small town in America. I just wanted somewhere no one would look. She paused, then took a sip of the bitter coffee. I needed to disappear. Not forever, just long enough to remember what it felt like to be ordinary, to talk to someone who didn't already know who I was, to buy a coffee without being followed, to sit in a library and read because I wanted to, not because it was on a schedule prepared by an advisor. Jesse leaned back in his chair, watching her over the rim of his cup. You picked a good place. Most people here barely remember the governor's name, let alone a European princess. That's the point, she said softly. People say good morning here. They look you in the eye. When you helped me with the tire, you didn't hesitate. You didn't ask for anything. I can't remember the last time someone did something for me without expecting something in return. He didn't respond right away. The silence stretched out, but it wasn't uncomfortable. And now? He asked. Now that they're looking for you? She set the mug down gently. Now I don't know. For once, she wasn't composed or polished. She looked like a woman who had run a long way just to catch her breath and now wasn't sure whether to keep running or stop. I didn't come here to be found, she added, her voice barely above a whisper. But maybe I came here to be seen. The sky had cleared by nightfall, washed clean by hours of steady rain. A rare kind of quiet settled over Cedar Creek, the kind that only comes after a storm, when the world feels a little softer, a little more still. Jesse drove with the windows down, the air cool and crisp as it rushed through the cab of the old truck. Elle sat beside him, hair pulled back, hoodie borrowed from him and sleeves pushed up past her wrists. She hadn't asked where they were going. She just looked at him, nodded once, and got in. They turned off the main road, following a narrow gravel path that wound through fields and past the edge of an old orchard long since abandoned. Jesse pulled up beside a low hill where the trees thinned and the stars came out like floodlights in the sky. He killed the engine, the sudden silence, leaving only the hum of crickets and the rustle of wind through grass. Come on, he said, hopping down and lowering the tailgate. Elle followed. her boots crunching softly over the dirt. He spread an old quilt across the truck bed, something faded but warm, and helped her climb up. She settled in beside him, pulling her knees up and wrapping her arms around them. Above them, the stars spilled across the sky in a breathtaking sprawl, bright, endless, unfiltered, no palace ceilings. No walls. Elle tilted her head back, exhaling slowly. "It's beautiful." Jessie glanced at her. "You never see stars like this in Morania?" She smiled faintly. "Only from the cliffs, but there they always felt untouchable, like they were meant for someone else. Here they felt closer, real. For a while they didn't talk, just lay side by side, eyes on the sky, breathing in time with the quiet around them. Then Elle laughed. Not the polite, measured kind he'd heard before, but a real laugh, unguarded and bright, like she'd forgotten for a second who she was supposed to be. Jessie turned to look at her. "What?" She covered her mouth, still smiling. "I was just thinking. This is the first time in years I've done nothing. No meetings, no cameras, no bodyguards watching my every move. Just this." "Sometimes nothing's exactly what you need," he said. She looked at him then, really looked. "Thank you for showing me this." He didn't say anything, just nodded, eyes drifting back to the sky. But in that silence, something shifted, something real. And under the stars, far from palaces and titles, Elle felt something she hadn't felt in a long, long time. Free. The next morning, the world returned to motion. Coffee brewed. Engines groaned. The garage buzzed back to life with the familiar clang of tools and the scent of oil in the air. Jessie moved through it all like he always did, steady, hands-on, fixing what was broken one bolt at a time. But his mind? His mind was somewhere else entirely. Somewhere in the back of his thoughts, Elle sat in his truck bed, wrapped in a blanket of stars, her laughter cutting through the night like something sacred. He hadn't expected it. That kind of joy from her. That kind of feeling from himself. He didn't believe in fairy tales. Never had. Growing up in Cedar Creek didn't leave much room for castles and crowns. Life was practical hard work, good people, small dreams you could afford to chase. But now, for the first time, Jessie felt like he was standing at the edge of something bigger. Something rare. And it had a name. Elle. She stopped by the garage around noon, casual as if it hadn't been her laughing under the stars beside him just hours before. Her hair was loose today, waves brushing her shoulders, and she wore the same hoodie he'd lent her like it belonged to her now. She leaned against the open garage door, arms crossed, watching him with a look that made it hard to focus on spark plugs and wrenches. "I brought lunch," she said, holding up a brown paper bag. "Figured you could use a break." He chuckled, wiping his hands on a rag. "You always bribe your way into a mechanic's heart with sandwiches?" "Only the good ones," she said, that teasing smile curling at the edge of her lips. They ate on the hood of an old truck out back, their legs swinging, shoulders brushing just enough to notice. She talked about her childhood, not the royal parts, but the quiet moments. Feeding horses at her grandmother's summer estate, sneaking pastries from the kitchen when no one was looking, pretending the marble hallways were forests during hide and seek. He told her about learning cars from his dad, about how, when his mother passed, it was the smell of the garage that kept him grounded. How fixing things gave him purpose when nothing else made sense. By the time the food was gone, something unspoken sat between them. It wasn't just comfort anymore. It wasn't just curiosity. It was connection. As she slid off the hood, brushing crumbs from her jeans, Elle looked at him not like a princess hiding in plain sight, but like a woman seeing someone for exactly who he was. Jessie watched her walk away, heart beating a little louder in his chest. And for the first time, he let himself wonder, what if this was more than temporary? What if, somehow, a mechanic and a princess belonged in the same story after all? It started with a headline. Rick slapped a folded newspaper down on the garage counter just after sunrise, the ink still fresh, his eyes wide with the kind of gossip that usually came with a smirk. But today, there was no gringeous concern. "Check this out," he said, tapping the front page. "Foreign security detail questions locals in Fairgrove missing royal heir rumored to be in the U.S." Jesse didn't move at first. He kept working on the carburetor in front of him, pretending the words didn't send a jolt straight through his spine. But when he finally looked, the photo was unmistakable. Not a veleboot of the men. Black suits, earpieces, one of them with a crest barely visible on his lapel. The same crest Jesse had seen embossed in gold on the passport she hadn't meant for him to find. "They were just one town over?" he asked, voice low. Rick nodded, lowering his voice even though they were alone. "Yesterday. Asking about a woman traveling alone. European. Discreet, but intense. Sheriff says they've got diplomatic clearance, so no one can stop them. Said they're with the Moranian Royal Protection Unit." Jesse's jaw tensed. "And now they're moving west." "Looks like it. Fairgrove was only 15 miles out. They were close." Jesse felt it in his gut, the tightening of the circle, the way the quiet around town had started to shift. People talked more softly now, looked over their shoulders. Cedar Creek wasn't used to men in suits asking questions that carried consequences. He pulled off his gloves and stepped outside, the early morning sun casting long shadows across the gravel. The garage felt too open now, too exposed. Elle hadn't shown up yet today. She didn't always. She kept her schedule loose, drifting in and out like smoke. But now, that absence felt heavier. Louder. He pulled out his phone, thumb hovering over her contact. He didn't call. Not yet. But the message was clear. They were coming. And if she didn't run soon, everything she'd risked might disappear in the blink of a black SUV pulling up to the curb. By early afternoon, the town had a hum to it. Not loud Cedar Creek. Never got loud, but charged, like the air before a storm. People talked more quietly than usual, heads bent close together outside the bakery, at the diner counter, in the aisle between canned goods and coffee filters. Something was brewing. Jesse felt it the moment he stepped into Baird's grocery. The usual smiles were replaced with sideways glances. He grabbed a loaf of bread and 2 cans of chili, but it wasn't until he reached the back corner, near the register, that he saw the trouble forming. Elle stood in front of the magazine rack, thumbing through a local events calendar. Her hoodie was up, shielding most of her face. But not all of it. Mrs. Hargrave, the owner's sister, was standing nearby with a stack of tabloid magazines in hand. She was known for 3 Thingshire pound cake, her porch gossip, and her perfect recall of anyone who'd ever appeared in a fashion spread. She tilted her head slightly, squinting toward Elle. "Now wait a minute," she muttered. "You look just like Elle froze." Jesse stepped in fast. "Hey," he said, his voice louder than usual. "I've been looking for you." Elle turned toward him, startled but grateful. Jesse slipped his arm around her shoulder, like they'd known each other their whole lives. Mrs. Hargrave's eyes narrowed. "Does she model? I swear I saw her in Modern Elite a few years back. Some royal fashion thing." Elle gave a soft, practiced laugh. "I get that a lot," but Jesse could feel the tension in her shoulders. "Rigid, bracing. She's from out of state," he added smoothly. "Helping me with some bookkeeping. Definitely not royalty unless you count wrangling my invoices as a noble cause." That earned a laugh from the cashier, and Mrs. Hargrave didn't push further. But her eyes lingered as they walked out, suspicion still churning just beneath her powdered smile. Outside, Jesse let go of her and exhaled. That was close. Elle looked up at him, eyes wide but steady. "Too close." He nodded. "We're running out of quiet corners." She didn't argue. And Jesse knew next time they might not get to walk away unnoticed. The sky was dark by the time Jesse closed the garage for the night, the neon "open" sign flickering off with a faint buzz. He locked the door, pocketed the keys, and turned to find Elle already waiting beside his truck. She hadn't said much since the grocery store incident, but her silence had weight now, like she was choosing every breath, every glance, with care. "Come inside." he said gently. They walked through the garage and into the back office, where the single lamp cast a warm glow across the cluttered desk and cracked leather couch. Jesse pulled a duffel bag from beneath the counter-plane, weathered thing he'd used for fishing trips and emergency tool runs. He unzipped it and set it on the desk. She stared at it. "What's that?" "A start," he said. "Clothes, food, cash." Elle's brow furrowed. "You packed this for me?" "I don't think you've got much time," Jesse said. His voice was low, but there was urgency behind it now. "People are starting to notice. The guard's getting closer. Someone will talk, maybe by accident, maybe not. And if they find you here—" "They won't," she said, cutting him off. Jesse stepped closer, jaw tight. "You can't know that." She looked up at him then, eyes steady. "I know I'm tired of running." He didn't speak right away. The air between them crackled with everything unsaid. He wanted to protect her. Get her out. Keep her safe. But she wasn't asking for rescue, she was asking for something far more dangerous. A choice. "I found something here," she said softer now. "Something I never had, not even behind palace walls. People talk to me like I'm a person, not a title. You," her voice caught. "You look at me like I belong, like I'm not a burden, or a pawn, or a symbol." Jesse swallowed hard, hands clenched at his sides. "And I do. But none of that matters if they take you back." She reached out and touched his hand light, warm, real. "I'm done disappearing," she whispered. "I'd rather be found here, being myself, than keep hiding and lose who I am." The bag sat between them, unclaimed. And Jesse realized for the first time, maybe Everell wasn't the one who needed convincing. The field, just outside town, had become their place. No signs, no fences. Just an open stretch of land where the grass swayed like waves and the sky spilled over with stars. Jesse parked the truck at the top of the ridge, cut the engine, and let the silence settle around them. The night was clear, still, and unnervingly perfect. They climbed into the truck bed again, same quilt spread across the metal, same hush between them. But everything felt different now. Sharper. Slower. Like time had taken a breath and was holding it, waiting to see what they'd do next. Elle lay on her back, arms folded beneath her head, gazing upward. Her hair fanned across the blanket, catching bits of moonlight like silver threads. Jesse sat beside her for a while, just watching the rise and fall of her chest, memorizing the small things he wasn't sure he'd get to see again. "Do you ever wish you could freeze a moment?" she asked suddenly, her voice barely louder than the wind. "Just hold it, keep it from slipping away?" Jesse looked up at the stars. "All the time." She turned her head toward him. "What would you do with it?" "I'd stay right here," he said, without hesitation. "In this truck, under this sky, with you." Her lips parted just slightly, but no words came. Instead, she reached for his hand, lacing her fingers through his. It was the first time she'd touched him without fear in it. No hesitation. No looking over her shoulder. "I don't know what tomorrow looks like," she said quietly. "Or next week. I don't know who's coming or how long I can stay. But right now, this is the most real thing I've ever felt." Jesse turned to her, and in the hush of that field, no guards, no titles, no fear, he leaned in and kissed her. Slow. Certain. It wasn't desperate. It wasn't rushed. It was two people who knew this might be their only chance to say what words couldn't carry. They stayed like that for hours, curled beneath the stars, their world shrinking to the quiet rhythm of breath and heartbeat. And as the wind moved gently through the grass around them, they both knew whatever happened next, they wouldn't forget this night. Not ever. The morning broke too quietly. The sun crept over the hills with that soft golden glow Cedar Creek was known for, casting long shadows across Main Street and warming up the dewy pavement. But something in the air felt wrong, tight, coiled, like the town was holding its breath. Jesse knew it the moment he stepped out of the garage. The silence wasn't the usual peaceful kind. It was the kind that came before a siren, before a storm. He saw it in the way Marla from the diner avoided his eyes when she walked past. Heard it in the nervous edge to Rick's voice when he called from down the street. "You hear anything about black cars coming in this morning?" Jesse stiffened. "Where?" "West side of town, just outside the old mill road. 3 of them. Government plates. Unmarked." His gut twisted. "How long ago?" 10 minutes, maybe." Jesse didn't wait. He was already moving, stripping off his gloves, grabbing his keys, heart thudding harder with each step. He didn't need confirmation. He knew. Someone had talked. He tore through the side roads toward the cottage Elle had been renting again, old 2-bedroom tucked behind the trees at the edge of town, just far enough out to be overlooked. Not anymore. He pulled up fast, gravel crunching under his tires, and jumped out before the truck had even fully stopped. Elle was standing on the porch. She'd heard him coming. Her eyes met his and widened. "They're here, aren't they?" Jesse didn't answer. He didn't need to. The look on his face said everything. She didn't cry, didn't panic. But he saw something crack in her, just for a second. That carefully held composure, that royal spinite slipped. And underneath it was just Elle. Scared. Cornered. "I think someone tipped them off," Jesse said, his voice hard. "Could have been the woman from the grocery store. Maybe someone at the diner. I don't know. But they're close." She nodded once, slow and heavy, like the weight of it was finally too much to hold. "Then it's over." "No," Jesse said quickly. "It's not. We can still." But she held up her hand. "Jesse, it was always going to end this way." Sirens were faint in the distance now. Faint, but getting louder. She looked at him like she was memorizing his face. And Jesse realized this wasn't just a goodbye. It was surrender. Gravel flew behind Jesse's pickup as he slammed it into gear and peeled away from the cottage, the tires screaming against the turn. Elle sat beside him, seatbelt already buckled, hair flying loose around her face. She didn't speak. Neither of them did. There wasn't time. In the rearview mirror, the flash of black SUVs tore through the tree line too, maybe 3 of them, fanning out like wolves on a scent. Their engines were quiet, sleek, far too clean for these country roads. But they moved fast. Faster than they should have. Jesse cursed under his breath and took a hard right down a dirt trail few locals even remembered. The truck jolted, suspension groaning, mud splattering up the sides. He glanced at Elle, white-knuckled, wide-eyed, but calm in a way that scared him more than panic would have. "They're gaining," she said. He nodded once, jaw clenched. They weren't planning to knock. Behind them, one of the SUVs swerved onto the path, tires chewing through mud like teeth. A second followed. The third didn't bother with subtlety. It veered straight across the open field, headlights cutting through the trees, aggressive, unrelenting. Above, a distant whirring grew louder. Elle looked up. Helicopter. Of course they brought a chopper. "Hold on," Jesse growled, wrenching the wheel left and barreling through a break in the fence line. The truck soared for half a second, then slammed back down, landing hard enough to jolt their teeth. But it gave them a lead. The SUVs were built for speed, not improvisation. Jesse's truck? It was built from 100 repairs and a little bit of stubborn. They ducked under a canopy of trees, the road disappearing into rutted dirt, branches scraping the windows. The helicopter passed overhead too fast, too high to see through the leaves. For now, Elle looked at him, chest rising and falling fast, but her voice stayed even. "Do you know where you're going?" "Nope," Jesse said, turning sharply again, "but I know where they won't." And for a few precious minutes, they were ghosts vanishing into the back roads and brush, no titles, no rules, no guarantees. Just a mechanic and a runaway princess, running like hell into the unknown. The cabin was barely standing more wood rot than structure, with a slanted roof and windows, long since eaten away by weather and time. But it was off the grid, buried deep in the woods near the Tennessee border, and far enough from the main roads that even the Royal Security Team's sleek black SUVs wouldn't find it unless they knew exactly where to look. Jesse killed the engine and let the truck tick quietly as it cooled. He and Elle sat in silence, breath fogging in the cooler mountain air. Their escape had bought them hours, not days, and both of them knew it. "This place won't hold," Elle said softly, eyes scanning the trees, the shadows, the silence. "It doesn't have to," Jesse replied. "Just has to give us a head start." Inside, the cabin smelled of pine, dust, and old smoke. Jesse broke open a window from the inside to clear the air. The fireplace was half functional, and the woodpile behind the shed hadn't seen use in years, but they managed to get a small flame going enough to warm the edges of their panic. Elle sat on the floor beside the hearth, legs pulled to her chest, hair still damp from the river they'd crossed to throw off the SUV trail. Her borrowed hoodie was streaked with mud. She looked nothing like royalty, just human, tired, worn down to the bone. "We can cross the state line at first light," Jesse said, unfolding a map across the rickety table. "There's a stretch of back road that cuts south through no man's land. No cameras, no traffic. If we can reach it." "What happens after that?" she asked, not looking at him. He paused. "Then you disappear again. New name, new town. And you?" He looked at her, really looked. "I'm not sure yet." A long silence followed. The fire cracked gently between them. "I hate this," Elle whispered. "Running, hiding, always waiting for someone to catch up. I thought I could live with it, but now..." She didn't finish. She didn't have to. Jesse crossed the room and sat beside her, shoulder brushing hers. "You're not alone anymore," he said. And for a while, they just sat there, two people, caught in a moment between freedom and fear, holding on to the flicker of something that still felt like hope. The fire had burned down to glowing embers by the time Elle spoke again, her voice barely louder than the hush of the wind slipping through the cracks in the cabin walls. "I'm not scared of them finding me," she said, her knees drawn to her chest, gaze fixed on the last flicker of flame. "I'm scared of what happens when they do." Jesse looked up from the map spread across his lap. The cabin was quiet, save for the occasional groan of shifting wood, the forest whispering just beyond the walls. He'd known the words were coming, felt them building in her like pressure behind glass. But still, hearing them out loud changed the air in the room. "I'm not afraid of prison," Elle continued, her voice tightening. "I'm not even afraid of dying. But going back to that life, smiling for cameras, wearing crowns, I didn't choose. Standing next to people who think of me as a pawn and not a person that terrifies me." She turned to him then, eyes glistening. "They'll make it look soft, elegant, but it's not. It's a cage, Jesse, with velvet bars and gold-plated locks. And once I'm inside again, they won't let me out." He moved toward her slowly, sitting beside her on the worn floorboards. The heat from the fire had faded, but her pain radiated like something alive. "You ever try to tell them that?" he asked gently. "I tried," she said, a tear sliding down her cheek. "I begged. They told me duty comes first, that it's my place, that thousands of people are depending on me being what they need, not what I want." Jesse said nothing for a long moment. He just watched her. And when she finally looked at him, truly looked at him, something in her face crumbled. "I don't want to lose who I've found here," she whispered. "Not just this place, but me. I never knew I could laugh like I did that night in your truck, or feel safe, seen." He reached out and brushed his thumb across her cheek, catching the tear before it fell. "You don't have to go back to that cage," he said softly. "I might not have a choice." Jesse leaned in, forehead resting gently against hers. "Then we'll find another way." And in that moment, tangled in truth and tears, Elle let herself believe him. Even if only for one night. Dawn came too fast. The sky outside the cabin shifted from deep blue to the pale gray of morning, the kind of quiet light that made everything feel delicate, temporary. Jesse stood at the window, scanning the tree line for movement. He'd barely slept, this body too wired, his mind too full of everything that could go wrong. Elle was still on the floor near the cold hearth, wrapped in the quilt from the truck. Her eyes were open, fixed on the wood beams above, but her expression was far away. She hadn't cried again, not since the night before. But the quiet in her now felt heavier, like she'd already made a decision. He heard it first, the low rumble of tires on gravel. Then came the second sound, quieter, more surgical, boots. He turned sharply to the window, black SUVs. 3 of them, crawling up the dirt path like shadows. A fourth vehicle pulled in behind them, a van with diplomatic plates and a royal crest barely visible in the pale morning light. The Moranian Royal Guard. Professional, unforgiving. Jesse's heart hammered. "We've got to go, out the back if we cut across the creek, and—" Elle sat up slowly. "No," he froze. "What?" "I'm not running anymore," she said softly, rising to her feet. "Not if it means dragging you down with me, Elle." She crossed the room in 2 quiet steps and placed her hand on his chest, grounding him. "They won't hurt me, not if I go willingly. But if I run again, they'll make an example. And you'll be part of it. I don't care what they threaten, we can disappear." "No," she said, firmer now. "You've already risked everything just by helping me. If I run, I'll lose what little choice I still have left." A knock thundered against the cabin door. She looked at him, eyes full of everything she couldn't say. "This isn't forever." Jesse stepped closer, voice hoarse. "Don't do this. I have to." She leaned in and kissed him, soft and slow, like sealing something in memory. Then she turned and opened the door. The guards moved quickly, surrounding her with quiet authority. She didn't resist. Didn't look back. Jesse stood frozen as the SUVs disappeared down the path, the dust settling long after they were gone. And just like that, the silence returned. But this time, it felt like loss. The morning haze clung low to the ground, casting long shadows across the forest floor as the last of the black SUVs faded down the gravel path. The hum of engines was gone now, swallowed by the stillness that followed their departure. All that remained was dust in the air, tire tracks in the dirt, and Jesse standing alone at the edge of the clearing, hands clenched at his sides, chest hollow. It hadn't felt real until the door shut behind her. Until the guards nodded once, barely acknowledging him, and drove off like she'd been a package, a problem solved. But before that, just before Elle had looked back, only for a second, just long enough to see him one last time. And in that look was every word they hadn't said, every promise they weren't allowed to make. And then she moved. She'd crossed the distance between them in a heartbeat, boots crunching softly in the damp dirt, hair falling loose around her face. The guards tensed, but didn't stop her. She reached up, cupped his face in her cold hands, and kissed him. It wasn't desperate. It wasn't dramatic. It was deliberate. The kind of kiss that brands a person. That says, remember me, even when the world is doing its best to make you forget. When she pulled back, her voice was a whisper, barely louder than the wind. This isn't the end, Jesse. I'll find a way. He wanted to believe it, wanted to beg her not to go. But he saw the steel in her spine, the quiet fire behind her fear. She wasn't walking away because she wanted to. She was doing it because she had to, because she was still protecting him. I'll wait, he said softly. However long it takes. She smiled, then soft, broken, real. Don't. His chest tightened. Why not? Because when I come back, she whispered, stepping away, I want you to be living, not waiting. The guards called her name once, and she turned. No crown. No fanfare. Just Elle, the girl who had once stood in the rain with a flat tire and a hidden life, and who had somehow changed everything. And then she was gone. The days rolled on, but time felt strange in Cedar Creek, measured not by calendars or clocks, but by the absence of her. Jesse woke early each morning, same as always. Coffee at dawn. Garage lights flicked on before the sun fully cleared the treetops. He took the same job soil changes, brake pads, the occasional stubborn transmission, and smiled when he was supposed to, but the rhythm of his life had shifted. The hum beneath it all had changed. Elle was gone, and the silence she left behind was louder than any goodbye. At first, people asked. Curious looks, cautious questions. "Hey, Jesse, whatever happened to that friend of yours?" Or, "She go back home?" He gave polite nods, vague answers. No one pushed too hard. Cedar Creek respected a man's quiet. But the truth was, she hadn't just left, she'd been taken. Not forcibly, not violently, but it had felt like loss, all the same. One day she was there, and the next, nothing. The cabin by the border sat empty now. He drove by once, maybe twice, just to see. The quilt was still in the truck bed, folded neatly behind the seat. He hadn't brought himself to move it. Nights were the worst. When the tools were packed away, the lights were out, and there was no more distraction to keep his thoughts at bay. He'd sit on the porch with a beer, eyes tilted toward the stars, the same ones they'd watched together from the back of his truck. Sometimes he'd talk to her, quietly, like she could hear him from across an ocean. No one knew her real name, not in town, not in full. But Jesse did. He whispered it once, under his breath, just to see how it felt in the air. Eleanor. He'd promised he wouldn't wait, that he'd keep living, but the truth was, he couldn't go back to before. Not really. Not when everything, every small joy, every quiet second was laced with the ghost of her laugh, the press of her hand, the memory of a woman who once stood in the rain and changed the course of his entire life. She was gone. And yet, somehow, she was everywhere. It started with one letter. Late one night, after the garage had gone dark and the house was too quiet to bear, Jesse sat at the kitchen table with an old notebook and a pen that had nearly dried out. He stared at the blank page for a long while, fingers hovering, unsure what he was doing. And then, without thinking, he wrote, L. The rest came like breath. Slow at first, halting. Then pouring out in quiet waves. He wrote about the days since she left, about the empty chair in the truck, about the way the wind still tugged at the trees behind the garage like it carried her voice with it. He told her about Mrs. Keller's chickens finally breaking through the fence again and how Rick was still overcharging for used spark plugs. He didn't write like a man hoping she'd read it. He wrote like a man who needed to speak just to remember the sound of her name. The next night, he wrote again. You'd laugh at how many people still ask about you. I tell them you moved on. I don't say where. Then another. Do you remember the stars? I went out to the ridge, brought the quilt, sat there a while. It didn't feel the same. And another. I think about you more than I should, more than I promised I would. But you carved your name into the quiet parts of my life. And now, there's no getting it out. The notebook filled slowly, one page at a time. Jesse never signed the letters, never sealed them. Just folded each one gently and slid it into a weathered envelope, stacking them in an old cigar box he kept under his bed. Some nights, he thought about mailing them just once, just in case. But to where? To a palace he'd never seen? A kingdom whose borders he still didn't understand? So instead, he kept writing. Because somewhere between grease-stained fingers and ink-streaked pages, it helped him feel like she wasn't so far away. Even if the letters never reached her, even if she never came back. Jesse wasn't much for morning news. He usually flipped straight past the channels full of noise and polished anchors heading for the weather or the local farm reports. But that morning, as he stood in line at the Cedar Creek feed, Supply, the grainy TV mounted above the register, caught his eye. A breaking banner flashed across the bottom of the screen. Crowned, Princess Eleanor ascends the throne of Morania amid political upheaval. His heart stopped. There she was framed in velvet and gold, standing on the marble steps of a palace he had only imagined. Crown on her head, hands clasped in front of her, cameras flashing like lightning all around her. Reporters jostled behind a security line, voices rising in chaotic bursts of French and English. But Jesse only saw her eyes. She wasn't crying. She wasn't smiling. She looked still, and strangely distant, like she wasn't really there at all. The customer in front of him muttered something about politics and moved on. Jesse stayed frozen, staring at the screen like it might blink and tell him it was all a mistake. "Didn't you used to know a girl looked like her?" the cashier asked casually, ringing up a bag of seed. Jesse didn't answer. Not really. He just gave a small nod, took his receipt, and walked out into the cold morning air. Back at the garage, he sat on the workbench, dust drifting in the morning light, heart too full to name. He pulled out the old cigar box and opened it slowly, flipping through the stack of unsent letterless words to her, written in the dark, folded with hope and silence. He didn't know what to feel. Pride? Anger? Loss? No, what he felt was something more complicated, something heavier. He'd always known she didn't belong here, not forever. He just hadn't expected the world to take her back so quickly. Still, even as he stared at her distant image on the screen, adorned in jewels and obligation, he saw something else buried in the stiffness of her posture and the silence behind her gaze, longing. And maybe, just maybe, a flicker of hope. The news broke 3 days after her coronation. Jesse was under the hood of a rusted-out Impala when Rick burst into the garage, waving a newspaper like it was on fire. "You better sit down," he said, breathless, eyes wide with disbelief. "She did it! She actually did it!" Jesse wiped his hands, brow furrowed. "What are you talking about?" Rick held up the front page. The headline took up half the space in bold block letters. "Queen Eleanor refuses royal marriage calls for parliamentary reform in televised speech." Below, it was a still shot of her standing at the royal podium, no crown, no royal garb, just a sharp navy dress, a single strand of pearls, and a face that was calm, resolute, and utterly unapologetic. Jesse took the paper from Rick's hands and sat down on the nearest crate. He read every word. The story detailed a shocking address to the Moranian Parliament, where Queen Eleanor announced she would not proceed with the arranged marriage that had been orchestrated before her coronation, breaking a centuries-old tradition. She'd spoken of autonomy, of a nation that needed leadership shaped by vision, not bloodlines. She proposed revisions to royal succession, greater representation in government, and, for the first time, publicly questioned the monarchy's role in modern Morania. She didn't ask for permission. She declared it. And the world, stunned, divided, electric, was listening. Jesse's hands trembled slightly as he turned the page. There, in smaller print, was a quote from her speech. "A crown is not a cage, and tradition is not a life sentence. I will not marry for politics. I will not reign for appearances. I will lead for my people, and I will do it as myself." Rick whistled low. "She's got steel in her spine, that one." Jesse folded the paper gently, the faintest smile touching his lips. She'd done it. Not just survived, but chosen her path, carved her name into history on her own terms. He didn't know what this meant for them, if there was still a them, but for the first time in weeks, he didn't feel helpless. She hadn't forgotten who she was, and maybe, just maybe, she hadn't forgotten him either. The rain came in hard that night, thick sheets hammering against the tin roof of the garage, wind howling like it was trying to tear the town loose. Jesse was locking up late, the shop empty except for the sound of thunder rumbling through the valley. He hadn't slept well in weeks, too many thoughts. Too many memories folded between grease-stained tools and quiet nights under a starless sky. He flicked off the lights, pocketed his keys, and stepped into the storm. Lightning cracked above the hills as he jogged toward the small house behind the garage. He just reached the porch when he heard it. A knock. Soft. Quick. 2 beats. He froze. No one knocked this time of night. Not in weather like this. Slowly, Jesse stepped forward and opened the door. She stood there, soaked to the bone, hood down, hair plastered to her cheeks, rain streaming from her coat like it had followed her across an ocean. Her eyes were tired, wide, shining, but she was smiling, not the practiced smile from palace press photos. Not the guarded one she wore in coffee shops and late-night goodbyes. This was something else. She didn't say anything at first. Neither did he. Then, In a voice that shook just a little, she said, "I told you I'd find a way." Jesse just stared, heart pounding like it had waited for this moment, and wasn't quite sure it was real. "I thought," he swallowed. "I saw the headlines, the speech. I didn't know what came next." "I walked away," she said. "From the court, from the marriage, from the cage." She stepped forward, voice trembling now. "I left everything that wasn't mine. And I came back for what is." He didn't hesitate. He pulled her into his arms, rein and all, holding her like she might disappear if he blinked. She pressed her face into his shoulder, breathing him in like she'd missed the scent of oil and pine and the steady, grounding warmth of him. And for the first time since she left, the silence broke, not with words, but with the storm and her heartbeat, steady against his. The storm had faded by morning, leaving the world washed clean. Mist clung low to the fields, and the air smelled of damp earth and new beginnings. Jesse brewed coffee in the kitchen of the small house behind the garage, listening to the quiet hum of the old machine as the sun crept over the horizon. Elle sat at the table, wrapped in a flannel blanket, barefoot, hair still damp from the night before. No palace, no guards, no schedule. Just her, just Elle. She cradled the mug he handed her, fingers curled around the warmth, eyes on him like she still couldn't quite believe she was really here. He sat across from her, elbows on the table, studying her like he was afraid to blink and wake up alone again. "You didn't just leave," he said. "You walked away from a kingdom." She nodded slowly, sipping the coffee. "I did." He waited, and then, quietly, "How?" Elle exhaled, the steam from her mug curling in front of her lips. "The speech was only the beginning. Afterward, I met with the council, with my family. I told them I wouldn't be their figurehead, that I wouldn't be a face they used to keep the past alive." Her voice softened. "They didn't take it well." "And the crown?" She looked at him then, eyes clear and certain. "I gave it to my cousin. He's better suited. He wants the life I never did. He understands the politics, the diplomacy, the theater of it. I made it official last week." Jesse leaned back, stunned. "You really cut ties." Elle gave a small, peaceful smile. "I didn't cut them. I untangled them." He let the words hang between them, thick with meaning. "No titles?" he asked. "No titles," she confirmed. "No palace, no rules, no arranged anything." She shook her head, a glimmer of mischief in her smile. "Just me. Just us, if you'll have it." He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached across the table and took her hand. "I already did," he said simply. And in the stillness that followed, with no crown between them and no walls to climb, they began again, not as royalty and rescuer, not as secrets and strangers, but as two people who had finally found what they were both searching for. Spring came early that year. The trees bloomed a little brighter, the air felt a little lighter, and Cedar Creek buzzed with the kind of small-town chatter that carried equal parts curiosity and approval. Everyone had their theories, of course, about the mysterious woman who returned without fanfare but with fire in her eyes, about how Jesse Carter, the quiet mechanic, suddenly seemed lighter, like a man who'd been holding his breath for too long and had finally exhaled. The new sign went up on a Saturday morning, Royal Carter Auto, painted by hand. Lettered in deep navy blue with gold trim that shimmered just enough to hint at something special, something earned. Jesse stood back and admired it with a rag still in one hand and grease on his cheek. Elle stood beside him, arms crossed, a soft smudge of motor oil on the cuff of her sleeve. She smiled up at the sin knot because it was perfect, but because it wasn't. Because it belonged to them. "I still can't believe you let me put my name first," she teased, bumping her shoulder against his. "You outrank me," Jesse said, deadpan. "Technically." She laughed a sound he never got tired of hearing. The garage had grown in quiet ways. One extra bay, a new coat of paint, plants in old tire rims lining the front. Elle handled the books, the scheduling, the customer calls, things Jessie used to barely keep up with. But she also learned how to change oil, replace brake pads, and curse under her breath when a bolt refused to budge. She never asked for special treatment. Never needed it. Locals came by not just for the service, but to see them. To catch glimpses of the former queen turned small-town partner, wearing jeans and a ponytail, handing out invoices and wiping her hands on a shop towel like she'd been doing it her whole life. They weren't royalty anymore. But what they had was something better. Every evening, they closed up together. Jessie would flip the sign, Elle would sweep the floor, and sometimes just as the sun dipped behind the trees, they'd sit on the truck bed out back and watch the sky like they used to. No guards, no cameras, no fear. Just grease, grace, and the kind of love that doesn't ask for thrones, only a place to belong. And they had found it, right here.